Hello, Friday here. Don't know where you are. Right, let's start with. I'll tell you why I brought this up. In the mornings, first thing, I go to the comment section of Over the Peak and answer any comments. And this morning I found that I was nicely told off for using the description cheeky chinkies yesterday on a picture in the presentation. Fair enough. I admit I am sometimes behind the curve on these things. But thinking about my reply has altered some of the aspects of this presentation, and you might be able to spot them. So let's start in the United States of America with this median net worth of households 2005 and 2009 that I first used in July of this year. The more modern one, the 2009 net worth of households, United States, whites $113,000, Hispanics just over $6,000, and blacks just over $5,500. We'll come back to that later. But in the United Kingdom, just 60 babies a year adopted in England. Only 60 babies were adopted in England last year. Startling evidence of how Britain's system for adopting children is grinding to a halt despite record numbers being taken into care. Thousands of children are being held in limbo in care homes, secure units and temporary fostering because so few adoptions are being signed off by social workers. Their guidance has been to try and keep families together, which has also led to some children being left with negligent or abusive birth parents for too long. Also in the United Kingdom, The Guardian, North Sea gas production falls 25%. Alarming slump could put pressure on coalition, that's the coalition government in the United Kingdom, to approve controversial shale gas projects. Fracking in the UK, that'll cause some fuss. Where we read, North Sea gas production has slumped by 25% in the second quarter of the year, an alarming increase in the rate of decline that will cut tax revenue and could put more pressure on government to agree controversial shale gas developments. Figures from the Department of Energy and Climate Change also show a 36% rise in coal imports, but a leap from 6.3 to 9.6% for the amount of electricity generated by wind and other renewables. Ta-da! The department records that output of oil and associated gas liquids fell by 16% in the 3 months to end June, compared with a year earlier, the biggest decline since records began 16 years ago. This left Britain importing 3.6 tonnes of oil in the second quarter, compared with 2.8 tonnes in the same period of 2010, even though total oil demand fell by 1.7%. Efficient oil use in the UK, no doubt. North Sea oil depleting quickly. BBC News. But in the Middle East, US Ambassador Robert Ford pelted with tomatoes in Syria. Supporters of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad have pelted US Ambassador Robert Ford with tomatoes as he met an opposition figure in Syria. Al Jazeera tidies me up, corrects me on what I said last week, I think. Bahrain medical staff sentenced over protests. I thought they'd let them go, but no. 13 doctors and nurses who treated anti-government protesters are given 15-year jail terms for crimes against the state. They treated the protesters that had been shot by the government. So for doing that, they are put in jail for up to 15-year terms. global economy and tidying up from yesterday and the emerging markets and how they're not going to pull the Western world out of the poo this time, we've got these PMI things. And Brazil, top left, you can see that's nastily below 50. In fact, heading towards 45. China's just ticked up, but it is below 50. Russia is slightly below 50, and India is going down. European, similar sorts of things, but this is slightly different. This is PMI business expectations in blue and Eurozone consumer confidence in mucky yellow. And you can see that the zero line is very much towards the top of this chart, and we're now down at -15 to -20 on business expectations and consumer confidence in the Eurozone. Back into the United States of America, and a remarkable chart. 30-year fixed mortgages in blue and 10-year Treasury in red. Going back to 71, and it's a very, very clear picture from the 80s, and we can say Paul Volcker crushing inflation eventually. The 10-year Treasury is basically on its way down and down and down. And I suppose it's realistic to say now it's on its way down to Japanese levels. I can't think of any reason why it won't be. Which will make it very hard for savers because the Japanese levels are below 1%. But coming down with it is the 30-year fixed mortgage, very popular in the United States, and presumably that will come down and down with the 10-year Treasury as well. But what will this give us? We can say that the 10-year Treasury being so low is excellent for the government being able to refinance itself. It's excellent for people to be able to buy homes with a cheap mortgage, but it must have adverse effects because nothing really comes pure wonderful. And it's going to be interesting to see the next decade to see how these goodnesses and badnesses balance themselves out. Office of the Controller of the Currency, nastily set out website. Talking about mortgages, mortgage delinquencies rose during the second quarter. The quarterly OCC mortgage metrics, that's OCC is the Office of the Controller of the Currency, the OCC mortgage metrics report showed that 88% of the 32.7 million loans in the portfolio were current and performing at the end of the second quarter. So 88% performing. And this is another thing that we should really get nicely solid into our head, that the economy is being carved into two sections. In a way it always has been, but 88% are performing. That means people are paying their mortgage, and 12 aren't. But there is a huge difference between being in the one section or the other section. If you're in the 88 performing section, there's a good chance that you're doing very nicely. But if you're in the 12 non-performing, not paying your mortgage, the chance is that you're doing very badly, and there will be a large grey area in the performing that are very much struggling. Finish with Barney Frank's Racist Legacy by Daniel Greenfield. And pull out of this, the original Community Reinvestment Act had been passed in the name of racial justice, and that was the slogan under which proponents hoped to ram through its lunatic grandchild, the CRMA, and that's the Community Reinvestment and Modernisation Act. But no one had suffered as much from the effects of the CRA and was endangered by the CRMA as the people whom it was supposed to help. The subprime mortgage crisis was a trillion-dollar Ponzi scheme built on the backs of taxpayers with minorities as its cat's paws. Mortgages were issued to unqualified lenders by government mandate at terrible terms, which were then transformed into mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations. And later the entire Ponzi scheme had been run on the pretense of helping minority homeowners, with the result that median African American households lost half its net worth in 5 years. The progressives had convinced African Americans to put their money into home ownership. They had regulated and subsidized the banks to make it as easy and pain-free as possible, and defrauded them twice over, winning their political support with easy mortgages that got them to sink most of their net worth into home ownership. And we go back to this chart from the Pew Institute that we started with, and we can see now 2005 has been added, where it must be said that the Hispanics and blacks were doing better with their household net worth at 18,000 and 12,000 because they had put their money into housing. But we come back to the more modern 2009 one, when that all collapsed. It collapsed on top of the blacks and Hispanics because they went down to 5,500 and just over 6,000, and the whites collapsed from 134 to 113,000. I'll leave that without another word. Right, Mrs. Mystic is back tomorrow, so I don't know if I'll be posting tomorrow, but we'll see how we go. Thanks. Bye.